The Montana wind, a constant, often biting companion, whipped strands of hair across my weathered face as I stood amidst the towering corn. Each stalk, heavy with the promise of harvest, was a silent testament to generations of relentless toil on this soil, my land. I'm Ethan, and the deep, predictable rhythm of farming is etched into my very soul, a legacy I inherited not just from my parents, but from every sunrise and sunset I've witnessed here. This farm, with its sprawling fields and creaking barn, is more than just property. It's a living history book, holding the whispers of my ancestors and the dreams I've cultivated with my own hands. Yet, this profound connection to the land was precisely what my city kin, the affluent and perpetually polished members of the extended family, consistently dismissed with a sneer. "Just a dirt farmer, Ethan," my Uncle Silas would quip at family gatherings, his words dripping with thinly veiled contempt, as if my chosen path was a personal affront to their refined sensibilities. Aunt Carol, ever the social arbiter, would follow suit, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pity and disdain, an unspoken judgment that echoed through my younger years. They saw only the dust on my boots, never the gold in the grain. My cousins, fresh from their Ivy League institutions, barely acknowledged my presence. Their conversations revolved around mergers, acquisitions, and exotic vacations, worlds away from the cycles of planting and harvest that defined my existence. I was simply the one who got his hands dirty, a rough-hewn relic from a simpler time they'd rather forget, someone whose life didn't fit into their polished narratives of success. The distance between us wasn't just miles. It was a chasm of values and understanding, built brick by brick with every dismissive comment and every unreturned call. But the land, unlike my relatives, never judged. It demanded respect, sweat, and unwavering dedication, and in return it offered a profound sense of purpose that no corner office could ever replicate. This year's harvest, despite the looming whispers of a new threat, promised an abundance, a small, hard-won victory, in a life often overshadowed by their condescension. Unbeknownst to me, the very soil they scorned, the gritty earth beneath my worn boots, would soon become their unlikely salvation, forcing them to confront the true value of what they'd overlooked for so long. My childhood visits to their sprawling urban estates were always tinged with a quiet melancholy, a sense of being an outsider peering into a world that wasn't quite mine. While my cousins reveled in their meticulously manicured lawns and state-of-the-art gadgets, I found myself inexplicably drawn to the tiny, forgotten patch of earth behind their grand houses, fascinated by the sheer tenacity of a lone weed pushing through the concrete. I understood that resilience, that quiet struggle to grow against all odds, far better than their complicated toys. My parents, bless their hearts, had tirelessly attempted to bridge the growing chasm between our two worlds. They'd arrive bearing gifts of homemade preserves, still-warm pies, and garden-fresh vegetables, offerings often met with polite smiles that barely masked their dismissal, gifts that felt more like tokens of pity than genuine affection. After their passing, the visits dwindled to nothing, and the quarterly phone calls became annual, then vanished, leaving a profound void that I gradually filled with the hum of my tractor and the steady, unwavering companionship of Rusty, my loyal border collie. I found deep solace in the vast, quiet expanse of my fields, in the predictable, comforting dance of the seasons, each one bringing its unique challenges and rewards. My days were a cycle of early mornings and late nights, of planning and reacting, of nurturing life from the earth. But beyond the daily grind, I nurtured a private, almost secret passion: woodworking. From reclaimed barnwood, discarded pieces of history, I carved intricate figures, animals, faces, abstract shapes, pouring my quiet artistry and unspoken emotions into each piece. It was a world where their judgments held no sway, a sanctuary for the parts of me they never cared to see. I embraced the isolation as a shield, a way to protect my spirit from the constant sting of their consistent rejection, even as a quiet ache of longing for true family connection persisted beneath the surface. Sometimes, especially on long, solitary evenings, I'd wonder what it would be like to have that easy camaraderie, that unquestioning acceptance. But then I'd look at the land, or at one of my finished carvings and remember that purpose, earned with sweat and dedication, often outweighs superficial belonging. The crisp autumn air, usually a harbinger of successful harvest and the promise of a restful winter, carried a new unsettling chill that seemed to seep into my bones. A battered pickup rumbled down my long gravel driveway, kicking up a plume of dust that temporarily obscured Hank, a grizzled neighbor from down the road, as he emerged from the cab. His face was etched with grim news, a look I'd seen too many times on farmers' faces. "Ethan," he rasped, his voice tight with concern, "have you heard? There's a new strain of blight, aggressive and unforgiving. It's sweeping through the county, wiping out entire fields overnight." My stomach clenched, a cold knot forming in my gut. I'd noticed a subtle yellowing on some of my corn leaves, dismissed it as a minor anomaly, perhaps a nutrient deficiency. But a blight of this magnitude. Hank's words painted a devastating picture. It could decimate not just my carefully tended crops, but the entire agricultural community. Panic began to ripple through the region, threatening livelihoods that had taken generations to build, plunging countless families into despair. News from the local extension office, delivered over crackling phone lines, confirmed Hank's fears, their voices grim and resigned. My meticulously nurtured fields, once a source of immense pride and security, now felt terrifyingly vulnerable, like a ticking time bomb counting down to ruin. This wasn't just about my farm anymore. It was about the survival of an entire way of life, a stark and brutal reminder of the unpredictable and unforgiving nature of working the land. Every farmer knew that no matter how much you planned, how much you worked, nature always held the final say. The community started banding together, but a sense of dread hung heavy in the air. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away in the distant gleaming towers of the city, my Uncle Silas's investment firm, a towering edifice of financial might built on generations of shrewd dealings, was facing its own cataclysm. They had leveraged heavily on agricultural futures, banking on a record-breaking harvest, oblivious to the quiet struggles of the very land that fueled their profits. The impending blight, a force of nature they couldn't manipulate with spreadsheets and boardroom decisions, threatened to collapse their entire portfolio, jeopardizing not only his firm's legacy, but the very foundation of the family's vast wealth and social standing. Their world, too, was teetering on the brink. Days bled into a frantic blur of phone calls, anxious community meetings, and desperate attempts to find solutions that simply didn't exist. The blight's relentless march continued, claiming vast swaths of farmland with terrifying efficiency, leaving behind only withered, unusable crops. My own fields, though still holding strong, felt like a fragile shield against an unstoppable force, a mere delay to the inevitable. The air was thick with the scent of dying crops and a pervasive sense of helplessness. Then, on a particularly bleak evening, the phone rang. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen, momentarily paralyzing me with a strange sense of foreboding. I hesitated, then answered, half expecting a telemarketer or another grim update from the extension office. "Ethan." The voice was strained, unfamiliar in its desperation, yet slowly, unsettlingly, it registered. "It's Silas." My uncle. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden sharp pain. Years of stony silence shattered in an instant. Why now, after all this time? His usual condescending tone was conspicuously absent, replaced by a desperate, almost pleading quality I'd never heard from him before. He sounded genuinely rattled. We have a problem, Ethan. A monumental one," he began, his voice cracking with uncharacteristic vulnerability. He explained in a torrent of frantic words how his firm's ambitious investments in agricultural futures had been utterly blindsided by the blight. Millions, perhaps billions, stood to be lost, threatening to bankrupt not just his firm, but the entire family fortune. Their sprawling homes, their carefully constructed prestige, their very identity, all built on a foundation now crumbling beneath their feet. He stammered, clearly struggling to voice the unimaginable, then finally blurted it out, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "We need access to your land, Ethan. For hunting. Our investors are demanding a return, a visible show of solvency, a way to recoup some of their losses. A successful, high-profile hunt on a substantial property like yours is our only hope to salvage anything from this disaster." The bitter irony was a sharp, acrid taste in my mouth, almost choking me. The very land they'd always scorned, dismissed as nothing more than a dirt farm, was now their only lifeline, their last desperate hope. The power dynamic, so long tilted in their favor, had shifted irrevocably, dramatically. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more chapters of this story. They arrived the following Saturday, a procession of gleaming luxury SUVs kicking up a thick plume of dust on my long gravel driveway, a stark contrast to the utilitarian vehicles usually found here. Uncle Silas, Aunt Carol, and my cousins emerged from their air-conditioned cocoons, meticulously dressed in designer hunting gear that seemed utterly out of place amidst the practical grit of a working farm. It was a bizarre tableau, like seeing rare birds dropped into a chicken coop. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a palpable mix of their profound discomfort with the rural setting and my own simmering resentment, decades of slights and dismissals weighing heavily on my shoulders. Silas, usually so composed and arrogant, fidgeted with his expensive rifle, his eyes darting nervously around the sprawling landscape, clearly out of his element. Aunt Carol, typically radiating an air of untouchable sophistication, avoided my gaze, her perfectly manicured hands fluttering nervously, a rare sign of distress. My cousins, Mark and Sarah, who once wouldn't spare me a second glance at family gatherings, now offered tentative, awkward smiles, their city polish visibly chipped by their desperate circumstances. There were no apologies offered, no acknowledgement of their past dismissals, no recognition of the years of quiet hurt their words had inflicted. Their focus remained solely on their urgent need for the hunt, detailing the precise type of game their demanding investors expected, as if I were merely a vendor providing a service. I listened, my arms crossed, a silent observer of their unraveling desperation. The vastness of my property, once a symbol of my solitary existence and hard-won independence, now loomed large, an invaluable asset they suddenly desperately needed. It was a stark, almost poetic role reversal, one that brought a strange mix of grim satisfaction and a profound sadness for the years of lost connection, for the family that could have been if only they had seen beyond the dirt. We gathered in my old barn, a place steeped in generations of labor, the comforting sense of hay, aged wood, and honest toil filling the space. It was time to set the terms, to reclaim a dignity that had been denied to me for too long. My voice, though steady, held an underlying current of resolve that surprised even me. "Listen," I began, looking directly at Silas, letting my words hang in the air. "This land isn't just some recreational park for a quick weekend outing. It's my livelihood. It's where I live, where my parents lived, and where generations before them poured their lives and dreams into this very soil." I paused, allowing the weight of my words to settle before continuing. "And it's the land you all said I was just a dirt farmer on." A wave of uncomfortable silence washed over their faces, a collective flinch as the past caught up with them. "So, if you want access, there are rules, strict rules that protect this land and my way of life." I outlined them in detail. No hunting near the barns or residential areas, absolute adherence to state hunting seasons and strict bag limits, and paramount respect for the land itself. No littering, no damaging fences, no disturbing my livestock, and absolutely no off-road vehicles tearing up the fields. I also insisted on a condition that clearly caught them off guard. Any game taken would not be for their exclusive profit. A significant portion, if not all, would be shared with the local food bank to benefit the community that actually supported me. My cousin, Mark, began to protest, mumbling something about shareholders' expectations, but a sharp, silencing look from Silas quickly stifled him. They exchanged glances, then nodded, a reluctant admission of their desperate situation. They had no choice but to agree. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably, and I felt a quiet, powerful strength asserting my boundaries. It wasn't about malice or petty revenge, but about a profound sense of principle and the hard-won dignity of my own life. This wasn't just about hunting. It was about respect, about finally being seen and valued, not for what I could give them, but for who I was and what I represented. As the hunting party, now equipped with my terms, began to prepare, the familiar sight of their city-bred awkwardness with the wilderness brought old wounds resurfacing with a surprising, almost visceral clarity. I remembered vividly the Christmas my father, his face beaming with pride, presented my cousins with meticulously handcrafted wooden toys, only to have Aunt Carol declare them unsanitary and swiftly whisk them away to a closet. I recalled the frustration of trying to explain the intricate dance of crop rotation and soil health to Silas, only to be met with a dismissive pat on the head and a patronizing, "That's cute, Ethan. Keep up the good work." Their condescension had always felt like a physical weight, pressing down on my aspirations, making me question my own worth and the value of my chosen life. Now, watching them fumble with their expensive but impractical equipment, clearly out of their element, I saw a raw vulnerability I'd never witnessed before. There was a moment when Silas, usually so composed and arrogant, struggled with a tangled rifle strap, his face contorted in genuine frustration, a flicker of helplessness replacing his usual polished facade. It wasn't pity I felt, but a strange, unsettling empathy for their current predicament, even as the echoes of their past words still stung. The vastness of the land seemed to amplify both their desperation and my own lingering sense of injustice. The wind carried their strained conversations, their hushed arguments about strategy, and the growing frustration in their voices. This hunt was proving to be far more challenging than their boardroom negotiations. The game was wily, the terrain unforgiving, and their lack of experience was glaring. Later that day, my neighbor Hank stopped by, his weathered face creased with concern, pulling up in his own dusty pickup. "They giving you trouble, Ethan?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the distant figures, his hand resting on the hilt of his hunting knife. "You just say the word. We're all behind you." His quiet, unwavering support was a powerful balm, a reminder that my true family extended far beyond blood, encompassing the resilient community that understood and valued the land as much as I did. It was a solidarity they, in their isolated wealth, could never comprehend. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more of Ethan's story. The first few days of the hunt were predictably tense, a struggle against both nature and their own ingrained expectations. They grappled with the rugged terrain, the capricious Montana elements, and their profound lack of experience in the wilderness. I observed them from a comfortable distance, offering only terse, non-committal advice when absolutely necessary, letting the land itself be their harshest teacher. They complained about the cold, the long treks, and the cunning of the local wildlife, all things I'd long taken for granted. One particularly frustrating afternoon, I found Mark, my cousin, visibly dejected, his designer jacket smudged with mud and his face etched with a look of utter defeat. He'd lost his bearings in a dense patch of timber and was clearly on the verge of giving up, muttering under his breath about this ridiculous charade. He even confessed, with a surprising tremor in his voice, to being anxious about disappointing his father, revealing a vulnerability I hadn't known he possessed. It was a small crack in his otherwise impenetrable facade of urban sophistication. I didn't gloat, nor did I offer any patronizing remarks. Instead, I simply pointed him in the right direction, offered him my extra water bottle, and shared a basic but effective tip about reading deer tracks, showing him how to spot the subtle signs on the forest floor. Later that evening, he returned to the makeshift camp, not with a trophy buck but with a small, albeit respectable, doe, his face alight with a genuine, unforced smile, a smile I'd never seen on him before. "Thanks, Ethan," he said, and for the first time, it felt sincere, devoid of any hidden agenda or obligation. To my surprise, he even offered to help me mend a section of barbed wire fence that had been damaged by a fallen tree earlier in the week, an offer I hesitantly accepted. We worked in a comfortable silence, the rhythmic clang of the hammer against the staples and the stretch of wire filling the space between us. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the rigid lines between us began to soften. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but a fragile bridge was being built, forged not in words but in the shared experience of demanding physical labor on the land. As the hunt progressed into its final days, something truly unexpected began to unfold, a shift in dynamic that went far beyond mere tolerance. The initial awkwardness and thinly veiled animosity slowly gave way to a grudging, then genuinely growing respect. They witnessed firsthand the sheer physical and mental effort, the deep practical knowledge required to not just survive, but to truly thrive off the land, lessons far removed from their high-stakes boardrooms. Silas, initially aloof and constantly preoccupied with his phone, started asking surprisingly earnest questions about crop rotation, soil health, and the migratory patterns of local wildlife, his intellectual curiosity genuinely piqued by the complexities of the natural world. Aunt Carol, who once scoffed at my calloused hands and mud-splattered clothes, now seemed genuinely fascinated by the simple, profound rhythm of farm life, even helping me gather eggs from the chicken coop one morning, giggling like a schoolgirl when a hen pecked gently at her manicured fingers. My cousins, though still far from seasoned outdoorsmen, learned to appreciate the profound silence of the wilderness, the sharp, clean taste of fresh air, and the quiet satisfaction of a hard day's honest work. They began to see the land not as a resource to be exploited, but as a living entity that demanded respect and partnership. One evening, around a small crackling campfire, as countless stars blazed in the impossibly dark Montana sky, Silas finally broke through his own carefully constructed facade. His voice, softer than I'd ever heard it, almost vulnerable, cut through the night, devoid of its usual booming authority. "Ethan," he began, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames, We were wrong. So terribly wrong about you. About this life. We judged you and we were fools for it. We let our own narrow view of success blind us to true value. It wasn't a full flowery apology, but it was raw, honest, and for the first time truly felt like a start, a genuine acknowledgement of their past mistakes. The hunt, born of financial desperation, had inadvertently become something far more profound. It wasn't just about securing their investments, it was about reconnecting with a fundamental reality they had long dismissed, a reality embodied by the dirt farmer they had so casually scorned for decades. The hunt concluded successfully, enough game secured to appease their anxious investors, and more importantly to salvage their precarious financial situation. As they packed their expensive gear into the SUVs, the palpable shift in the atmosphere was undeniable. The condescension that had defined our interactions for so long was completely gone, replaced by a quiet humility, a newfound understanding that had been forged in the crucible of their desperation and the raw honesty of the land. Silas extended his hand, shaking mine firmly, his gaze meeting mine directly for the first time without a hint of superiority. His grip was surprisingly strong, and his voice, though still tinged with relief, was sincere. "Thank you, Ethan," he said, "for everything. For your patience, for your generosity, for reminding us what truly matters beyond balance sheets and stock market reports." Aunt Carol, to my astonishment, even offered a small, hesitant hug, a gesture so utterly out of character it spoke volumes about the internal shift she'd experienced. Mark, my cousin, lingered the longest, his eyes sweeping across the vast expanse of the farm with a contemplative, almost wistful appreciation. "You know," he murmured, his voice thoughtful, "I think I finally get it now. There's something incredibly real about this, something vital we lost sight of in the city." He paused, then added, "Maybe I'll come back sometime, just to help. No hunting involved." It was a tentative offer, but one I considered with a small internal smile. They left, not as the haughty, dismissive city relatives I had known for decades, but as people who had faced the precipice of ruin and, in doing so, had glimpsed a different kind of wealth, a different kind of strength in the land and in the values they'd dismissed. The farm, which had always been my steadfast companion and silent confidant, had also served as a profound teacher for them, breaking down their carefully constructed facades. As I watched their luxury SUVs disappear down the dusty road, leaving only a faint trail behind, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. The bitter echoes of the past had not entirely faded, but new seeds had undeniably been sown. Seeds of understanding, of shared experience, and perhaps, just perhaps, the fragile beginnings of a genuine family connection. The farm remained my sanctuary, my enduring legacy, but it now also held the quiet promise of a future where being a dirt farmer was no longer a dismissive label, but a source of profound pride, unwavering respect, and unexpected kinship. "And that's the end of 'You're just a dirt farmer, not family,' they said. Now they need my permission to hunt on my land." If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, share it with your friends, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next compelling narrative. Thanks for watching.